Hey girl, welcome to another episode of She Travels Light. I'm your host, Audra Coats-Hudson, and this is the place where we focus on ditching our emotional baggage, getting out of our own way, and embracing God's plan for our lives. So today we're actually going to mix it up just a bit. I've got a very special guest that I'm going to introduce to you guys in just a second. And what we're actually going to do is just kind of continue our conversation from last week on the topic of sex, because there's a really important subtopic that we didn't get to hit on last time, and I really want to make sure we cover it, and that is actually the subject of pornography. So we're going to do just a bit of a deep dive into why pornography is so dangerous, how it affects our brains and our spirits, and what to do if you're dealing with the pornography addiction or any other hidden sin. So make sure that you guys stick around today so you can learn exactly how to guard your heart from pornography and the steps you need to take to overcome any type of hidden sin in your life. So now on to the good stuff. I would love to introduce you guys to a very good friend of mine. This is one of my go-to people for advice and wise counsel, and she's just an all-around wonderful and sweet and funny person, and she makes me want to be nicer because she's so nice. She's also an author and an authority on pornography addictions in Christian women, which is why I wanted to have her here with us today. So I'm really excited for you guys to be able to just hear her story and her heart on this issue. She's actually got a new book coming out. It's going to be out in the spring of 2019, and it's called Rend Your Hearts and Not Your Garments. And I'll let you guys know at the end of this episode how to get on the waiting list for that, because you do not want to miss this book. It is going to be epic, and I really believe that there's going to be a huge anointing on this book to set people free. So without further ado, I want to introduce you guys to the lovely and the incomparable Beth Nyhart. Welcome, Beth. Thank you so much for being my first guest on this show.
Hi, friend.
Hi. I'm so glad you're here. How are you today?
I'm doing good. I'm doing well.
Awesome. So last week, and we're just going to jump right in because I like to just dive into things. Last week, we spent a lot of time talking about sex, and I feel like pornography was just kind of like the missing piece to all of that. So one of the things that I think people kind of miss when they think about sex is kind of the pornography angle. And I think, and I've heard this in several Christian circles, and I want to kind of hear your thoughts about it, that pornography and even masturbation are good substitutes for Christian women who kind of want to avoid having a sexual relationship outside of marriage. It's kind of a good second choice. So I kind of wanted to get your thoughts on that. What do you think about that line of thought?
Yeah, I've heard that a lot too. And I think that in Christianity, we don't like to think about porn or masturbation very much. We don't like to talk about those things. But I think that there's kind of a disconnect where people think, okay, porn is a problem if you're looking at if it's incest porn, if it's child porn or bestiality or something especially gross or especially degrading or whatever. But if we're just talking about two people, vanilla heterosexual porn, that's not that bad, is it? I think that there's a lot of Christians who might look the other way or say, oh, well, it's not as bad as it could be, or is this really a big problem? And yeah, I would definitely say that it's a really big problem. And masturbation too. And that's not, there is a really difficult time in a person's life where they are single, and there is no good way to fulfill sexual feelings, sexual urges and desires. But I think that it's important for somebody to be saying this is not the right avenue for you.
And I would agree with you on that, because last week what we talked about was the way that your brain, all the chemicals that kind of come up when you're having sex, and how it really you start to create those neurological pathways. You're getting flooded with dopamine and all of these other hormones that kind of make sex addictive. And I think that's something that people don't understand about pornography, is that it works in your brain the same way. So if you're kind of thinking, well, I don't want to create any soul ties, and I don't want to, start to have these neurological pathways opening up in my brain and getting hooked on a person that's not my husband, I'll just use porn instead. But it works the same way. It does the exact same thing to your brain that having actual sex does. And I think that it might even make it a little bit worse, because when you're having sex, it's two people, you're bonding to a person. But when it's pornography, it's just you and fake people. There's no relationship there. It's just kind of getting straight to arousal and then orgasm, that it really starts to short circuit how you even think and perceive, and your brain starts to interpret sex, because now it's not a sharing of your body and your heart with somebody else. It's just all about arousal and orgasm. And that's completely different.
Yeah, and I would say even the more that you look at pornography, masturbate, read erotica, whatever the thing is, whatever content you're consuming specifically for the purpose of sexually arousing yourself, you're making sex all about you. You're taking it out of its proper context of marriage, and you're also creating in yourself a habit and a desire for sex that is not going to be able to be filled in a monogamous marriage relationship. So it makes sex self-focused. It makes sex about you, about getting to orgasm as quickly as possible, in a way that's only fulfilling to you. And there's a lot about that does not translate into marriage and will create problems for you later on.
I think what you just said, there was something you said a second ago, that pornography kind of creates a desire for sex that can't be fulfilled in a marriage. And I would love for you to kind of unpack that a little bit and kind of elaborate on that point, because I thought that was really interesting.
So pornography is addictive, and addictions escalate. So if you look at any other substance or whatever that people get addicted to, there's an escalation to it. You need a harder drug, or you need more alcohol, or you need, with pornography, it becomes you need more porn, or you need more degrading porn. And you can see even in just like the history of pornography, there's a gradual increase of violence or decrease in age. Satan really has a way of just making people desire things that are more and more degrading and more depraved. And as you feed your body that, as you feed your brain those things, you're going to desire more. It's not going to do it for you anymore. You're not going to be aroused by what aroused you before. And so that's where I really believe that causes a problem later on, whenever maybe you do get married thinking, okay, now I'm going to have a person to have sex with. Pornography isn't going to be a problem for me anymore. But if you've been consuming pornography that is violent, or consuming pornography that is in some way like illegal, or you've been consuming pornography that is multiple people, or homosexual pornography, there's just like, those are all things you're not going to be able to bring into a marriage sexual relationship, and so those are things that you've kind of trained your brain to desire and trained your brain to be turned on by, that your husband can't do for you.
Ooh, wow. I think that is something that I would not have considered from the aspect, because like you just said, if you're used to watching porn with maybe multiple people, or homosexual porn, or, anything else that gets kind of deeper and deeper and goes along that natural progression of more depraved, because that's how addictions work. You want harder stuff. And then you get married and it's just regular, straight, vanilla sex. Maybe this porn you started off with but wasn't enough for you. Now you've just brought a problem that you probably never foresaw happening into your marriage, because your husband is only one person. And all of those things that you've just trained yourself to be turned on and aroused by, he can't do for you. Man, wow.
Yeah, and I think that a lot of Christian singles will go into marriage thinking that it's going to solve their all of their sexual discontent, because they think, well, now I have someone to have sex with. Like, now this is okay. But it's just not. Your husband might not have a problem with pornography, and so the things that you are interested in doing sexually, he might just not be interested in at all. Or if he does have a problem with pornography, you might just be kind of enabling each other. So I think that people do things in the bedroom, and like, that's fine. But But I think that there's like a progression to that road, that if you're asking each other to kind of like go down places that you might not both be on board with, or maybe like the end of them is not going to be honoring to God. So I think that's how people will get into like swinging or into orgies or into, you know, just the different stuff that people do together that isn't that picture of Christ in the church, that picture of the marriage relationship and the oneness that marriage is supposed to be and that sex is supposed to be.
That's a really good point. That it's one of those things where we think, oh, swingers, oh, orgies, a Christian couple would never, ever do that. But I think at the end of the day, what people, they do. Yeah. I think at the end of the day, people forget that sin is not any more enticing or destructive in the life of a Christian than it is in the life of a non-believer. So just because we have the power of God inside of us to overcome sin, it doesn't still mean that the devil can't run roughshod all over us and get us to kind of follow our flesh, which is what it is, following our flesh down a path that we never, ever, ever, ever intended to go down. But now we are down it. Now we're stuck. And it's really hard to kind of find that reversal to it. And I think that it's hubris to think that there's a sin that we would never, I would never do that. I would never. But you don't just, go to get married and then end up in an orgy 2 days later. Like, there's a progression that happens, and you have to learn how to recognize the signs of that. And that's actually why I've got Beth here today. And Beth, I wonder if you would be willing to just kind of like share your story about how pornography kind of ended up in your life.
Yeah. So I was introduced to pornography when I was 8. I found probably a Playboy magazine, I don't know, but down by the creek that's like half a mile from our house. And for me, it was like a switch flipped. I think you hear about people just like kind of instantly being addicted to things. And I think for me, it was just like, I was just fascinated, like almost immediately. And so at that point, I didn't have access to the internet and stuff like that. But I think just that fascination with sexual things was kind of awakened in me, and you can't turn that off again. There's in Song of Solomon, they talk about don't awaken love before it desires. And my mom would always say that that's really because like once those feelings and those sexual desires are awakened in you, you can't turn them off. Like you can't put them back to sleep. And that just creates this like long gap of frustration between when you start desiring sexual things and when you can in a healthy and holy way enact sexual things. So that was kind of the beginning for me. My brother was a big computer person, and we soon got a computer and the internet, and so my fascination with sexual things became, I suddenly had access to be able to find them. And really what it kind of ended up being at its worst for me was going into chat rooms and just cyber sex, basically, which is like people just talking about sex or like describing sex or doing role-playing kind of things. So in my story, I never really went out and had sex with people. It was all this online fantasy, reading erotic materials or watching pornographic things or having these conversations that were very, very sexual in nature for the purpose of being aroused, orgasming, and just kind of escaping.
And how old were you when you started kind of like getting into the online world and exploring some of these topics?
Probably 10, 11, 12, somewhere in there.
Okay, so basically like middle school aged.
Yeah.
And did anybody know, like your parents or your brother or any friends, did anybody know that that's what you were doing?
No, and it was very difficult for them when they finally found out. And I've had a lot of people, my parents, my youth group leaders, because at the same, I was raised in a Christian home, and my parents I really believe they did an awesome job. I never felt like my faith was just me believing what my parents believed. They were very big on us knowing the Bible and understanding salvation, and we were very involved in our church. I was really involved in the youth group, and I did a lot. I was really respected as a leader as a teenager. And so for me, that was really hard because I had this double life. I had my public kind of persona to my family and my friends in church, where everyone thought that I was like amazing. And then I had my private life, my thought life, and then what I was doing online that was completely the opposite and getting worse. So I think that as a Christian who just has let like Satan build strongholds of sin in your life, you're constantly conflicted. You're constantly in emotional upheaval. And James talks about this. He says, a double-minded man is unstable in all of his ways. And I think that extends to, I mean, you're emotionally unstable, you're like mentally unstable, you're just kind of like constantly frustrated and feeling like I can't keep this up.
So when you kind of think back to that time of like having that double life of presenting one face to your church and your parents and family, and then like kind of secretly being this other person that kind of engaged in activities that I'm sure you knew that they were wrong and they're not something that you should have been doing. Like, how did that affect like your family relationships or relationship with church leaders when like you knew that you had this kind of secret life that you just weren't sharing or talking about?
Well, so something that I think that Satan really cultivates in people, and that people who are kind of trapped in a secret sin will be able to see in themselves, is that you will get to the point where you turn it off. It does not bother you at all. You feel like that other person. And I know that I was just saying it was very conflicting, but I think it's very conflicting when you're thinking about it, right? Mm-hmm. But whenever I was in church, I could almost turn off the part of my brain that knew that I was engaging in some of the very things that I was telling other people not to. I could have full conversations with any of my youth leaders about these subjects and not feel anything. Mm. And I think that Satan will get you to that point where your conscience is seared and you're ignoring it. You're just pretending. But the Holy Spirit, there's a war going on inside of you. And when you're not, I think like in that zone where you're putting on that face, you feel so ashamed and so disgusted at yourself and so trapped and just wishing that you could be 100% one person and not live in that like zone where you're a double-faced, double-minded.
So I love that you just talked about that, because I had an addiction too. I used to smoke marijuana and get really stupid high all the time. And I can totally understand what you mean about compartmentalizing and like being able to kind of ignore it when you feel like it needs to be ignored. And then later on, like really be just, have it gnawing at you, and really kind of being able to just, and I think, there's that pastor from New Life Church that I listened to a really great series where he was talking about like a double-minded person is like a person that has like the Berlin Wall, kind of between them. And on one side of the wall, you're one person. And then the other side of the wall, you're another person. And that's exactly how something like this works. When you're double-minded, it's like you hold two conflicting views and you're not a whole person because your mind is splintered.
That's Jim Reed.
Yes, Jim Reed.
Series. And you guys should listen to that because it's awesome.
Yes, if you are not familiar with Jim Reed and his church, he's got a series on his church podcast sermon called Destroyed. It's phenomenal. It's amazing and awesome. If you follow me on social media or Instagram or anything like that, I'm going to post a link to it so you can check it out. But for you, Beth, I know kind of being in the church and being raised around that, at what point did you kind of realize that it had escalated from just something that you enjoy doing when you're alone to becoming like an addiction that you couldn't stop?
Man, okay. So it just really, I think whenever I was like 16, 17, I was done. And I knew that I could not maintain this. And I was trying to figure out how to confess, but I didn't know how. I didn't know who to confess to, or in my church and my family, I didn't want to lose all of the respect that I had gained. I didn't want them to look at me differently, and I was terrified that my whole life would change if I tried to deal with it with anybody that I knew. And so I gave myself an ultimatum. I was a teenager. I was very dramatic. And I decided that I was either going to, I found this little discipleship school that I was looking at, and I told myself, okay, either you go to this discipleship school and you deal with this, tell somebody everything, ask for help, or get out of church leadership, stop pretending to be this person, and go. I don't know that I've ever actually said this, but to myself, I was saying, go pursue the things you say you want. I had been doing all of this stuff online, but like I had said, I hadn't had sex. I hadn't really done any of in real life with a real person. And I was, at that point, was telling myself, okay, if that's what you want, then go do it. And what I did, it was right after my 18th birthday. And I went to this little discipleship school, and they have a gap year program. So I was in that. I had advisors assigned to me that were a staff family, and I basically just went and told them that I needed to confess some stuff to them and ask for help. And so the wife took me down into their basement family room, and people running around, kids playing upstairs. And I remember just sitting down there with this lady. I did not know her very well, but I was I just have to be I have to do this. I have to be obedient and just do this. And so I told her everything, vomited all of my issues onto this poor woman, and probably for the next 3, 4, 5 years of my life, they were a rock for me. They very carefully led me through this time of just rebuilding my faith and rebuilding my habits and letting the Holy Spirit renew my mind, and memorizing scripture and learning how to combat temptation and learning how to confess over and over again and keep my conscience clear. So that, I think, for me, is obviously my big turning point. But yeah, that I am just eternally grateful. I think that God put me in a position where that was possible, because for a lot of people, they just don't have opportunity.
That's awesome that you're able to meet somebody and unburden that, and not have people look at you sideways and think totally different of you.
Right.
And
which
not only
eventually, eventually I was able to just, talk to everyone about it, and they did. I have shocked quite a few people, but now that's fine, because I think it took me another 10 years of God working on my heart and teaching me about sin for me to be at a place where now I can say, it doesn't define me as a person anymore. This is an opportunity for God's strength to be made perfect in my weakness, and an opportunity for God to show himself powerful in me, and to be an example for other people, so that they know that they can come out of sin too. So yes, I did get to the point where I was telling people and they were looking at me sideways, but at that, it didn't bother me anymore.
The sideways looks didn't bother you. And I think it's really interesting what you were just saying, because by all accounts, you were living the virtuous Christian life because you were 18 years old and technically a virgin.
Yep.
Technically hadn't had sex. And I think that is a really important point for especially church leadership, that just saying don't have sex to young people in the body or single people in general is not enough, because here you were not having sex, but secretly addicted to pornography, and not having a way, especially with the leadership positions you were in, probably making it very difficult for you to go to your pastor and be like, by the way, I'm addicted to porn. So there's that.
Well, I think, so looking back, I think I could have gone to my pastor. I'm sure that thing would have helped me, and and even hearing that, I've had a few of my pastors from that time have read, early draft copies of my book and have said, I wish that you would have felt comfortable with me. And so I really believe that that was an option for me, but it was so hard because I think on this side of confession, you just feel so trapped and you feel like it's impossible. There's opportunities will come up for you to say something and you'll sit there and the words will be frozen in your mouth. And you just wait until the moment passes by and then wish that you had said something, but you're also relieved that you didn't. So yeah, I think that that God is the one who puts us in the places that we need to be and gives us the people that we can trust to help us. But for me, I was able to go outside of my immediate circle, and that really helped me just get over that hump of first talking about it.
And I think that that's like such a great description that you just gave right there about like what a stronghold does. Like a demonic stronghold in your mind makes you believe that you can't go to your pastor, who probably, people are pastors because they love God and they want to shepherd a flock. That's a good pastor. And a stronghold will make you think that, nope, if I go to that person and I talk to that person, they're going to look at me different. Or like in your case, I don't want to lose all of the leadership and the respect that I've gained. And so Satan is really good about helping us construct these things because we've already believed one lie. In your case, it was, I'm already believing this lie about pornography. And in my case, I'm already believing this lie about getting high all the time. And now that I'm so used to like hearing Satan's voice in my head and believing his lies, it's hard to tell the difference between his voice and my own thoughts because I'm so used to hearing that and putting it together. And then you start to believe that you can't tell anybody. And you start to believe that if anybody knows this about you, they're going to, your life's never going to be the same. And I don't know if any listeners are struggling with that, but Beth and I we want to encourage you that that is not true because both of us have had to confess. Both of us have had to come clean with what we were dealing with in darkness. Both of us have had to step into the light, and stepping into the light is really scary. It's terrifying. Like, I remember my voice shook, like you just get like really hot and really sweaty to have to like flat out say like, this is what I'm struggling with. But that's what Satan counts on. He counts on the fear and everything like you're worried about becoming so momentous that you'll never say anything. And when you don't, he's happy because now he can keep you bound instead of finding that freedom.
Amen.
Well, that kind of brings me to your book, Beth. So can you share a little bit about what your book is about? As I feel like it really kind of speaks to this portion of the conversation.
Yeah. So my book is called Rend Your Heart and Not Your Garment. And that's from a passage in Joel where he's telling Israel, you are repenting on the outside and your heart is not changing. That they would rip their clothes and lay on the ground and do the sackcloth and ashes thing. But if your heart is not broken before God, that's not what he wants. He doesn't want your big display of repentance. He wants your true broken heart of repentance. So the book is about sin. And it's really coming from my experience of seeing that the church doesn't really give good avenues for people to deal with sin. A lot of times we're very surprised whenever sin does come out. If someone's sin nature is showing, we're very shocked by that. Or like, man, pull it together. But really, since the 3rd chapter of the Bible, this has been the problem with all of humanity. We have a sin nature. And so this shouldn't be something that we're surprised by. It should be a very normal and common teaching to set people up to expect that they will be tempted, that they will have sin in their life, tell them what to do, how to confess, what accountability should look like. You kind of have set avenues for that in the church, in your family, and so what I'm really trying to convey with this book is what does God actually say sin is? What does sin actually look like in a healthy Christian? What does sin look like when it gets to this point where we're dealing with like addictive sin, or we're dealing with like huge strongholds of sin, and then how do we go through these steps of having a broken heart, of confessing our sin, of finding accountability, of accepting God's forgiveness, and giving our stories to him and our lives to him and saying, this is yours to do with as you want. And my only job and my only goal is to continually be giving you everything I've got and seeing what you're going to do with it. So it's like my book in 2 minutes.
The 2-minute recap of
Right,
Beth's
exactly.
book. And I think you said a lot in those 2 minutes. And so I kind of want to go back to a couple of things that really stood out to me. Like, I love that you talked about that we have to, as Christians, understand that we will be tempted, and there's going to be a lot of times where we're going to fall flat on our face and we are going to end up sinning. Like, we should never
normal. That should surprise you. And that shouldn't be anything that you would think, oh my word, nobody can know that this just happened. Because that is the first lie that Satan will tell you to get you to keep yourself isolated. And when you isolate sin, you give it power. Mm. So even from the very beginning, these little things, these first thoughts of bitterness, these first thoughts of arousal at something that you shouldn't be aroused by, like, those are things that need to be brought to God, that need to be, like, you need to confess them. And having, like, a structure of people around you that you know understand that sin is a normal part of life, that has been, essential to me in just being able to function. I can't function without like my structure of people that I can talk to whenever, the first hints of sinful behavior in my mind.
And I think that that's super important because, like you said, it starts with a thought. That's why the Bible tells us to take every thought captive, because that's how that stuff gets in there. Like, you can't control what thoughts pop into your mind, but you can definitely control what thoughts you allow to be planted in your heart, and the thoughts that you meditate on, and the thoughts that you allow to kind of germinate into your spirit. And that's why it's so important that, like, your thought life is something, and I think I love how Joyce Myers puts it. She says to learn how to think about what you're thinking about, because that's how things start. Nobody, no married person just, like, wakes up one day and says, I'm going to have an affair and have sex with somebody that's not my spouse. That starts with flirting. It starts with, seeing somebody who you think is attractive and kind of, like, meditating on how sexy you think they are. Like, it all starts in our minds and in our hearts. And if we don't learn how to police our thoughts and really share, like Beth said, with somebody, like, I'm really struggling with thinking about this, I'm having a hard time dealing with it, because when you keep sin in the dark and you let it become isolated, that's when it grows really powerful.
Yeah. One of the biggest problems is that we don't hate our sin. We want it, we love it, and we want to keep it. Like, those thoughts, they feel good. It feels good to be bitter. You feel justified in your anger. It feels good to be aroused. It feels good to be critical of someone else. And if we're fostering those things in our brain, it's going to escalate. It's going to become a bigger and bigger problem. And the only way to deal with those thoughts is to recognize them, to say, this is not something that I want growing in me. So let me show it to someone else and say, I'm going to kill this. Please, like, be aware that it's there. And that I'm trying to kill it so that we can make sure I actually get it done.
It's like spiritual roundup. I'm going to need to put some spiritual weed killer on the stuff I got growing, because it's just kind of creeping up. And I think that that's such a good point, because, like Beth just talked about, the desire for sex is not wrong. It's a God-given desire. And not that, complaining about people is an actual desire. There's usually something underneath that, because sometimes when you're complaining about something that's unfair, you don't really want to complain. What you want is justice. You feel like justice hasn't been done. And the desire for justice also isn't wrong. The problem is when we try to get these desires filled in a way that is not godly, outside of how God wants to fill these desires that he gave us, that's when we run into a problem, because that's what Satan does. He takes our desires and he helps us to twist them, and our flesh is like, oh, this is amazing and awesome, because this is really what I want. So now we're fighting this battle on two fronts. We're fighting the enemy and we're fighting our own sin nature. And a lot of times we don't know how to get those desires met in God, so we just allow them to be twisted, and it ends up creating this problem.
Yeah, I could listen to you talk all day, Audra.
Let's not do that. I'm not going to talk all day because we're going to be wrapping up this podcast shortly, and I want to hear more about what you have to say, Beth. So if somebody is really struggling with like a hidden sin, and I know you mentioned some things early on, but like if you were to give them kind of like a game plan of something that they could take like at the end of this podcast, if they're dealing with this, they've got some steps that they can legitimately take right now and start to see some turnaround in a situation. What would you tell them?
Yeah, so the first thing that I would say is pray. Pray and tell God that you want to be obedient and you want to be holy and you need the grace to do that, and you need Him to provide the opportunity, to provide the words, to provide the exact situation, to provide the right person. You need Him to give you those things, because in your own strength you can't do it. In your own strength you don't have the power to overcome sin and be holy like He's holy. You don't have that. But God is gracious. He gives us good things. He makes provision for our holiness, and He will. Amen. So the first thing that you need to do is tell Him that you want that, and tell Him that you're ready for Him to provide those things for you. And the second thing that I would do if I were you is write your confession down on paper so that you have articulated it. It is there. It is not a secret thing in your mind anymore. And that could be something that you can just hand to someone, not just anyone, but like if you find that you can't get it out, that's a tool that you can use. But even just for the purpose of saying it, putting it somewhere other than in your own mind. And then be looking for what God will provide for you. If you do have Christian leaders, if you do have a church that does counseling, or your pastor does counseling, the pastor and his wife might be a good plan. Or I know that our church has like a Christian marriage and family therapist. That's what she does, but she also will work through the church and they'll connect people with her. And so I would start looking for what is already available to you, what God has already provided in your sphere as ways for you to confess. And then you can ask that person, or you can also look around and see what is available for accountability. An accountability partner is not there to make sure that you don't sin. An accountability partner is someone who will walk through life with you, who will consistently ask you how you're doing, consistently talk to you about difficult subjects, specifically know what they're praying for you, and will be completely honest with you, and will share in your appointments and in your victories, and just someone that you can bounce these thoughts and feelings off of, and that will give you good biblical counsel. I think that we have some warped views and ideas of what accountability should be, and often it's not helpful. Asking God for that, or coming to that place where you're broken, asking God for the grace, because the Holy Spirit is who will renew your mind. God is the one that is going to do the work of transforming your heart, and so that's so important to not make it just about these things, that the steps that you're going to take, but ask Him, because He is the one with that power, and then find a way to confess, find a way to stay accountable.
And I really love that first step, because I think that so often we feel like we have to do things in our own strength. And there's nothing wrong with, if it's porn or whatever, there's nothing wrong with getting a porn filter or what you do on the web so that you can't access the sites. Right. Those are good things to do. They're not bad things to do. But I think that we overlook, and this is what separates the Christians from non-Christians, is that when the Holy Spirit resides in us and we become God's daughters and we become, part of the family of God, is that when we say, Lord, I can't do this. I cannot do this in my own strength. I am incapable of doing this. That is the definition of us humbling ourselves before the Lord so that He can lift us up. Because we're not trying to overcome this in our own strength. We are doing what the Word says and submitting ourselves, therefore, to God, so that we can resist the devil and he'll flee. But if we skip the humbling part if we skip the part where we have to like basically say, I am, scum, or what did Paul say? Oh, wretched man that I am, who will save me from this?
And
It's when you get to that point.
Sinners of who I am the worst.
Yes. Exactly.
Like, really acknowledging that like this is an ugly and horrible thing that resides in my heart, and I need God.
And that's powerful there, because then I feel like that a lot of times like that's God's like, finally.
I know.
Finally they're to this place where they're not trying to do it on their own, and they're asking me for what I have been wanting and waiting and desiring to give them, is to set them free, because that's what Jesus said, that he's come to set the captives free. But if we don't acknowledge that we're captive, we don't acknowledge that we are powerless to change our own hearts and change our own situation, if we don't acknowledge that before him and we try to do it in our own strength, we might get pretty far, but it's never going to be to the point where we're set free, because we need God to do that for us. We need him to do the heavy lifting of transformation so that we can really come out of it. And I love that you just like went there first. Like, first of all, you got to get real with yourself and with Jesus and say that you can't do it.
I think that our job is to get in a position where he can work, right? So our job is to present ourselves as living sacrifices. We just need to like lay on the altar and stay there and let him do his thing. But that is where accountability will help you. That is where those porn filters will help you. They help you keep yourself from getting back into the habitual pattern of sin, the practice of sin, because you need to be in the position where God is able to work. And if you keep on throwing yourself back in the pit, like, you have to go through the whole process of pulling yourself out again. So I think that accountability is such a powerful tool to help people lay on that altar long enough for God to do some work. Because he does. He's so faithful. He will renew your mind. He will take all of those things that you look at yourself and cringe. Because I think like there's just this disbelief, like how could that turn me on? But our hearts are desperately sick and wicked, and we should not be surprised at any amount of ugliness that comes from them.
Very true. Very true. Well, Beth, it's been awesome having you here. I've loved listening to you, listening to your heart. I've loved the wisdom that you have shared with us, and I'm just so grateful that you were able to join us today.
This is my first podcast, and I'm so nervous. Thank you so much for having me on.
Well, it was my pleasure. I know this will not be the last time I have you here, because you have so much to share that I am looking forward to the next time that you are here. Beth, how can they get in touch with you if they want to follow maybe your author page or get on the waiting list for your amazing book that's coming out? How do they stay in contact with you?
So I'm on Facebook and Instagram. On Facebook, it would be facebook.com/Rend Your Heart Book. And on Instagram, it's @Rend Your Heart Book. And my waiting list for the book is get.rendyourheartbook.com/waitlist. Those links are in my social media profiles too.
Yes, I will put all of those wonderful URLs in the show notes for the shows that you guys are able to go there, get on the waiting list, follow Beth. She posts really inspirational and wonderful content, especially on her Facebook page and Instagram. So if you get on, if you follow her, you're going to be able to get a lot of really good things from her. And then, of course, you'll be able to know when the book comes out so that you can get a copy.
If you get on my wait list, I will link you to the first blog post I ever wrote about my porn addiction, and it is an interesting read. But that is in your welcome email, so you should do it.
Awesome, great. So you'll get even more of Beth even right off the jump if you get on our wait list. All right, ladies. Well, that is all we have for you today. Thank you so much for joining me and Beth today. I really hope that you're able to get a lot out of this episode. I really hope, like I said, if you're struggling with any type of sin, that you follow the steps that Beth just outlined and gave you so that you can start to allow God to set you free from it. As always, if you guys want to follow me, you can follow me on Facebook. It's Audra Coats-Hudson Coaching, or Audra Coats-Hudson Coaching on Facebook. AudraCoats-Hudson.com if you want to head to my website where you're able to get all of my other contact information. If you need an accountability partner or if you're just struggling and need resources, I definitely have resources. So don't forget to join us next Wednesday and remember to bring a friend. So until next time, ladies, this is Audra and Beth reminding you to travel light.